My earliest memories are filled with the warmth of my father's smile and the comfort of our small rented apartment. I'm Carla, and until I was 13, my life was nothing but ordinary, in the best possible way. My dad, James, was the kind of father who made everything an adventure. Even though we lived in a modest apartment, he turned our tiny balcony into a fairy garden and our living room into a fort during rainy weekends. Mom, Sarah, was different, more reserved, always dreaming of a bigger house and a grander life. But back then, their differences seemed to balance each other out perfectly. "Carla, sweetie, would you like to spend the weekend at Grandpa's?" Mom would often ask, and I'd jump at the chance. Not because I didn't want to be home, but because Grandpa Richard's house was like a second home to me. It was this beautiful two-story Victorian with creaking wooden floors and endless corners to explore. "Your mother needs her alone time with your father," Grandpa would explain with a knowing smile when I'd arrive at his doorstep. "And I need my time with my favorite granddaughter." I was a perceptive child, more than the adults around me realized. I understood that Mom sometimes needed space, that she and Dad had their own relationship to nurture. It didn't hurt me, if anything, it made me feel mature. Plus, those weekends with Grandpa were precious. He'd tell me stories about Dad's childhood, teach me about managing money, he was a retired bank manager, and make the best pancakes in the world. "You know, Carla," he told me once while we were having breakfast on his porch, "your mother dreams of a house like this. But you know what's more important than a big house? A home filled with love." I nodded, understanding even at that young age. Our apartment might have been small, but it was filled with love. Dad would come home from his job at the insurance company, swing me around in his arms, and pepper Mom with kisses until she laughed despite herself. Those moments made our tiny space feel infinite. But life has a way of changing when you least expect it. I was 13 when Dad started losing weight rapidly. At first, he joked about it, saying he was finally getting in shape, but his eyes told a different story. The doctor's visits became more frequent, and Mom's face grew increasingly worried. "It's just a phase," Dad would say, ruffling my hair weakly. "I'll be back to my old self in no time." But he wasn't. The disease, aggressive pancreatic cancer, consumed him like a wildfire. Within months, my strong, vibrant father became a shadow of himself. I watched helplessly as Mom tried to hold everything together, but I could see her crumbling inside. The last conversation I had with Dad is forever etched in my memory. He was lying in his hospital bed, his hand barely strong enough to hold mine. "Take care of your mom for me, princess," he whispered. "And let Grandpa guide you. He's wiser than all of us combined." The year after Dad's death felt like living in a fog. Mom spiraled into such deep depression that she could barely look at me. I guess I reminded her too much of him. Thank goodness for Grandpa Richard. He became my rock, my safe harbor in the storm that our lives had become. Living in Grandpa's house wasn't just a temporary solution anymore, it became my new normal. Every morning, I'd wake up in what used to be Dad's old room, surrounded by his childhood photos and trophies. Grandpa made sure I kept up with school, helped me with homework, and tried his best to fill the void both my parents had left, one through death, the other through grief. Mom would call occasionally, but her voice always seemed distant, detached. Her visits were even rarer, quick stops where she'd barely meet my eyes, before rushing off again. I learned to stop expecting more. Then, exactly 1 year and 2 months after Dad's death, everything changed. Mom showed up at Grandpa's door one sunny Saturday morning, and I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the grieving widow in black, replaced by someone wearing a bright yellow dress and sporting a new haircut. Her face was glowing with unhappiness. "Carla, sweetie, pack your things. You're coming home," she announced, bouncing on her heels like a teenager. I looked at Grandpa, confused. He seemed just as surprised as I was. The drive back to our apartment was filled with Mom's cheerful chatter about everything and nothing. It was like sitting next to a stranger who happened to look like my mother. But the real shock came when we walked through our apartment door. There, in our small living room, stood a tall man and a girl who looked about 3 years younger than me. They both smiled awkwardly as Mom practically danced to their side. Carla, meet Robert and his daughter Emma. Robert is my fiancé, and Emma will be your new sister. We're getting married soon. Mom beamed, clutching Robert's arm. The room started spinning. What? When did this happen? Oh, we've been dating for a while now. Mom waved her hand dismissively. I didn't tell anyone about our relationship. You know how people can get jealous and judgmental. It was better this way. I stumbled to my old room, barely registering that it had been redecorated. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and called Grandpa. He answered on the first ring. Mom has a fiancé, I whispered into the phone. She's getting married and didn't tell anyone. There's a man here, and his daughter. Grandpa arrived within 20 minutes. I could hear the conversation from my room as he confronted Mom. Sarah, how could you do this without telling anyone? Without telling your own daughter? Dad, I'm happy for the first time in forever. Mom's voice was defensive. I've decided to start fresh, to live again. James would want that. He wouldn't want me to waste away in depression forever. There was a long pause before Grandpa spoke again, his voice heavy with resignation. I hope you'll be happy, Sarah. Just, don't forget you have a daughter who needs you too. The 3 months before the wedding were like living in some twisted alternate reality. Our small apartment felt even more cramped with 4 people instead of 2, but that wasn't the worst part. What really got to me was watching Emma, my soon-to-be stepsister, wrap my mother around her finger. Mom, can you help me with my hair? Emma would say, and my mother would drop everything, including our conversation, to assist her. The way she said Mom made my skin crawl, especially since she'd only known my mother for a few months. Mom seemed blind to everything except Emma. When Emma mentioned she loved ballet, Mom immediately signed her up for private lessons, something I'd begged for years ago but was told we couldn't afford. When Emma complained about her old phone being too slow, Mom bought her the latest iPhone model. When Emma wanted to redecorate her side of the bedroom we now shared, Mom took her shopping and spent hundreds of dollars on new bedding, curtains, and decorations. Your sister needs to feel welcome here, Mom would say whenever I tried to point out the disparity in treatment. Stepsister, I'd correct her. And I need to feel welcome too. She'd just shake her head and walk away. The wedding day itself was a modest affair at a local venue, but Mom glowed with happiness. I stood there in my bridesmaid dress, watching as she fussed over Emma's hair and makeup, barely sparing me a glance. Throughout the ceremony and reception, Mom kept Emma close, holding her hand, introducing her to everyone as my beautiful daughter. I might as well have been a waitress for all the attention I received. Grandpa gave them a check for $5,000 as a wedding gift, a generous amount by any standard. But I overheard Mom's reaction when she cornered him by the restrooms. Really, Dad? A check? She hissed, her face flushed from champagne and anger. I was counting on you giving us your house. We're a proper family now, we need the space. That apartment is too small for 4 people. Grandpa remained calm, though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Sarah, you're rushing everything. First the sudden engagement, now this? That house isn't just property to be handed over on a whim. Besides, it's where Carla spends half her time now. Oh, so that's it? You're playing favorites now? No, I'm being practical. And maybe you should be too. I slipped away before they could notice me, but the conversation haunted me. My mother had changed so much that I barely recognized her anymore. She'd created this new perfect family in her mind, with Emma as the star child and Robert as the ideal husband. There didn't seem to be any room left for me. So I did what any unwanted person would do, I spent more and more time at Grandpa's house. At least there, I didn't have to pretend to be happy about being replaced. 4 years have passed since that moment, and I was about to graduate from high school. Living in that apartment had become a masterclass in avoiding conflict. I'd learned to be quiet, to take up as little space as possible, to spend most of my time either in my room or at Grandpa's. One evening, during our weekly family dinner, another exercise in pretending we were one big happy family, I decided to share my plans for the future. "I've been accepted to State University," I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want to study finance and business management." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom put down her fork, exchanged a look with Robert, and cleared her throat. "Actually, Carla, I think it would be better if you started working after graduation. College isn't necessary for everyone." I stared at her, bewildered. "What are you talking about?" "Dad set up a college fund for me before he died. He always wanted me to get higher education." Mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "About that fund, Robert and I have been talking, and we think it would be better to save that money for Emma's education. She's incredibly talented, you know. Top of her class in everything. She'll need a good university education to reach her full potential." Robert nodded sagely. "Emma has shown remarkable aptitude in her studies. It would be the right thing to do, Carla. You could work for a few years, save up, and then go to college if you still want to." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "The college fund, the last gift my father had arranged for me, they wanted to take that too?" "That money is mine," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Dad left it specifically for MY education. You can't just give it to Emma." "Don't be selfish, Carla." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Emma is your sister." "Stepsister." I stood up so quickly, my chair fell backward. "And that money is the last thing I have from Dad. You've given her everything else, my room, your attention, your love. But you can't have this. I won't let you take it." "How dare you?" Mom was crying now, but I could see the manipulation in her tears. "After everything we've done for you. Emma needs." "Emma needs? What about what I need? What about what Dad wanted for me?" The argument ended with doors slamming and tears, mostly Mom's, as she wailed about my selfishness. After that night, the apartment became even more hostile. No one spoke to me unless absolutely necessary. Emma would smirk whenever she passed me in the hallway, and Robert wouldn't even look in my direction. When graduation day came, I wasn't surprised to find only Grandpa in the audience. He cheered loud enough for 4 people when they called my name, and his proud smile meant more to me than anything my new family could have offered. That evening, I packed everything I owned into 3 cardboard boxes and my old suitcase. Grandpa helped me load them into his car. "Your room is always ready for you, sweetheart," he said as we drove away from the apartment. "Always has been, always will be." I didn't look back as we left. There was nothing there for me anymore. College life became my escape. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make my father and Grandpa proud. The business and finance courses fascinated me, and I found myself excelling in ways that would have made Dad smile. Every evening, I'd call Grandpa to share what I'd learned. "Tell me again about derivatives," he'd say, even though he knew more about finance than my professors. "I love hearing you explain it." But as my college years progressed, I noticed changes in Grandpa's voice during our calls. He got tired more easily, and his usual sharp wit sometimes seemed dulled. During my visits home, I caught him wincing when he stood up or rubbing his chest when he thought I wasn't looking. "It's just age catching up with me," he'd say whenever I asked about his health. "Nothing to worry about, sweetheart." But I did worry. I started calling him twice a day instead of once, and I'd drive home every weekend I could, not just on holidays. We'd sit in his kitchen, drinking tea and talking about everything and nothing, just like we used to. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with such intense love that it made my throat tight. It was the middle of my final semester when Mom called. I almost didn't answer. It was the first time she'd called in 4 years. But something made me pick up. "Grandpa died last night," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "The funeral is on Thursday at 2 p.m. Hartford Funeral Home." The phone slipped from my hand. I don't remember much of what happened next, just that my roommate found me curled up on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Thursday came too quickly, and not quickly enough. The funeral home was exactly the kind of place Grandpa would have chosen, understated but elegant, with large windows letting in natural light. I arrived early, my black dress feeling too tight, my skin too sensitive, everything wrong, because Grandpa wasn't there to make it right. I expected to see Mom and her family, but they weren't there. Instead, Mr. Harrison, Grandpa's friend from his banking days, was organizing everything. "They're running a bit late," he said when I asked. "Your mother called to say they'd be delayed." The service was beautiful, filled with people from Grandpa's life sharing stories about his kindness, his integrity, his humor. I sat in the front row, alone with my grief, until halfway through the service when I heard the back door open. Mom swept in with Robert and Emma, all in perfectly coordinated black outfits. They took seats in the far back, and Mom didn't even glance in my direction. Her face was set in a mask of appropriate grief, but her eyes were already darting around the room, assessing, calculating. I turned back to face the front, my tears now burning with both grief and anger. Even here, even now, she couldn't acknowledge me. Couldn't put aside her pettiness for one day to mourn her own father. After the funeral service, I drove to Grandpa's house, my home for the past 4 years, only to stop short at the sight that greeted me. There, scattered across the front lawn like worthless debris, were garbage bags filled with my belongings. My clothes, my books, my photo albums, everything from my room had been unceremoniously thrown out. Some bags had split open, spilling my life across the grass. With trembling hands, I tried my key in the front door. It wouldn't turn. The lock had been changed. I was still standing there, key uselessly in hand, when the door swung open. Mom stood in the doorway, wearing the same black dress from the funeral, but now with an expression of triumph rather than grief. "Oh good, you're here to collect your things," she said, as if she was doing me a favor. "This is my house now. Dad's finally gone, and as his only child, I'm the rightful heir. I've already had the locks changed, we're moving in tonight." I stared at her, unable to process the cruelty of it all. "You couldn't even wait until after the funeral?" "These are my things, my home." "No, this is my home now," she cut me off sharply. "And you better take your stuff quickly, or it's going in the dumpster. I need to clear the space for Emma's things." She smiled coldly. "She's getting your old room, by the way. She's always wanted a bigger bedroom." I felt numb as I gathered my belongings, stuffing everything back into the torn bags, trying to collect the scattered photos of Dad and Grandpa from where they'd fallen in the grass. My mother stood in the doorway the entire time, watching me like a security guard, making sure I didn't try to steal anything. The drive back to my college dorm was a blur of tears and disbelief. My roommate helped me carry everything up, not asking questions when she saw my state. A week later, I received a call from a law firm. "Miss Johnson? This is Mr. Anderson from Anderson and Partners Law Firm. I'm your grandfather's notary. We need you to come in for the reading of his will. Would Thursday at 10 a.m. work for you?" I agreed, though I couldn't see the point. Mom had made it clear she was the heir to everything. When I arrived at the notary's office that Thursday, Mom, Robert, and Emma were already there, seated like royalty in the leather chairs. Emma was examining her manicure, while Robert scrolled through his phone. Mom's eyes narrowed when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked loudly enough for everyone in the office to hear. "You're clearly not needed for this. We're handling family business." Mr. Anderson adjusted his glasses and began reading from the document in front of him. "I, Richard James Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my last will and testament." He started with the formal language, but I saw Mom already smiling triumphantly. That smile froze when Mr. Anderson continued, "To my beloved granddaughter, Carla Johnson, I leave my house at 1542 Oak Street, along with all its contents, and my entire savings account containing $475,000. The room went deadly silent for a moment. Then Mom's voice shattered it. "What? This can't be right." She snatched the document from Mr. Anderson's hands, her eyes scanning frantically. "Where's my part? I'm his daughter." Mr. Anderson calmly retrieved the will. "Mrs. Waters, your father's wishes are quite clear. He leaves everything to Miss Carla Johnson. There is no provision for you in the will. This is impossible. Mom's face had turned scarlet. She manipulated him. She poisoned him against me. I'll sue. I'll contest this will. The will is ironclad, Mr. Anderson stated firmly. Your father had it properly witnessed and notarized 6 months ago. He was of completely sound mind, as attested by his doctor. Any attempt to contest it would be futile and expensive. Mom's strategy suddenly shifted. The rage in her eyes transformed into tears as she turned to me. Carla, sweetie, please, she pleaded, her voice honey-sweet now. We've already given up our apartment. We moved everything out yesterday. We have nowhere to go. You can't just throw us out on the street. We're family. I stood up, holding the folder Mr. Anderson had just handed me. Inside were the deed to the house, ownership transfer documents, and all the legal paperwork confirming my ownership of the property. Family? I asked quietly. Like how you threw my belongings onto the lawn before Grandpa was even in his grave? Like how you tried to steal my college fund? Like how you've treated me for the past 4 years? That was different. We were. This is your problem, not mine, I cut her off, turning to leave. I suggest you start looking for a new apartment. I drove straight to Grandpa's house, my house now, but I couldn't get in. I pulled out my phone and called a locksmith, explaining the situation. When he arrived, I showed him my freshly notarized ownership documents. I'm the legal owner of this house, I explained, showing him the paperwork. I need you to open these locks and then change them to new ones. I want to be the only one with the keys. As the locksmith worked, I gathered up everything that belonged to Mom, Robert, and Emma, all the clothes they'd already unpacked, their toiletries from the bathrooms, Emma's posters she'd already stuck to my old bedroom wall. I loaded it all into garbage bags, just as they'd done with my things. When the locksmith finished and handed me the new keys, I dragged all their bags onto the front porch and arranged them neatly. The symmetry of the situation wasn't lost on me, their belongings now sat where mine had been just days ago. As the sun began to set, I heard the familiar sound of Mom's car pulling into the driveway. I watched through the living room window, Grandpa's favorite spot to read his morning paper, as their reactions played out exactly as I'd expected. What is this? Mom's shriek could be heard clearly through the closed windows. Our things? All our things are outside. I opened the door, but stood firmly in the doorway as they approached. Mom's face was red with fury, Robert looked like he'd swallowed something sour, and Emma was already crying theatrical tears. How dare you? Mom stormed up the porch steps. We live here now. You can't do this to us. Actually, I can. This is my house now, legally and rightfully. You need to take your belongings and leave. We have nowhere to go, Emma wailed. You should have thought about that before giving up your apartment, I replied coolly. Not my problem. Mom tried to push past me into the house, but I stood my ground. Move, Carla. This is ridiculous. This is my father's house. No, it's my house now. And if you don't leave immediately with your things, I'm calling the police to report you for trespassing. After that, all these bags go straight to the dumpster. I pulled out my phone. Your choice, Mom. Just like you gave me a choice about my things a few days ago, remember? The next few minutes were filled with cursing and threats as they gathered their bags. Mom alternated between crying and screaming about how unfair it all was, while Emma kept saying I'd regret this. Robert muttered under his breath about contesting the will. As they loaded the last bag into their car, Mom turned to me one final time. You're no daughter of mine. Your father would be ashamed of you. I smiled sadly. No, Mom. Dad would be proud that I finally stood up for myself. Goodbye. I watched them drive away, their car disappearing around the corner. That was 6 months ago. I'm in my final semester now, about to graduate with honors. The house is being rented to a lovely young family, their monthly rent payments are helping me build my savings, just as Grandpa would have wanted. I found his letter in the study safe that first night, after everyone left. My dearest Carla, it began, if you're reading this, it means you've already dealt with your mother's reaction to my will. I'm sorry I had to put you through that, but I knew Sarah too well. I knew what she would try to do. You have your father's integrity and my business sense, use them both wisely. The house is yours to do with as you please. Just promise me you'll keep the family photos in the attic. Some memories are worth keeping, even the painful ones. I kept that promise, along with the others I made to both him and Dad. I'm focusing on my future now, letting go of the past, but keeping the lessons it taught me. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to, sometimes it's who believes in you, who protects you, who helps you grow. Mom, Robert, and Emma still live somewhere in the city. I hear they found a new apartment eventually. They've tried to contact me a few times, usually when they need something, but I don't respond. Some chapters of our lives are better left closed.
Hey there, I'm Abigail Hawkins, but everyone calls me Abby. I'm 25, fresh out of college with a degree in agricultural science, and I'm eager to put my knowledge to work on our family farm. Hawkins Farm has been in our family for generations, and I've got big plans to bring it into the 21st century. Dad, look at these soil reports, I said, spreading out papers on the kitchen table. If we implement crop rotation and sustainable practices, we could boost our yield by 30%. Dad, Frank Hawkins to everyone else, just grunted, sipping his coffee. We've been doing things the same way for 50 years, Abby. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's Dad for you, stubborn as a mule and just as resistant to change. My sister Megan walked in with her husband, Brad, trailing behind. You two arguing about the farm again? She asked, rolling her eyes. Not arguing, I replied, just trying to discuss the future. Brad smirked. Good luck with that. Some of us have real jobs to get to. I bit my tongue. Megan and Brad lived in the city and only visited on holidays. They couldn't care less about the farm, but were always quick to criticize. Later that day, I vented to my best friend Sarah at her organic farm down the road. I just don't get it, Sarah. Why can't Dad see that we need to adapt? Sarah nodded sympathetically. Some people are just set in their ways, abs. But hey, look at what I've done here. Maybe seeing a successful modern farm will change his mind. I sighed, glancing around at Sarah's thriving fields. Maybe. I just wish he'd give me a chance to prove myself. The next day, at my part-time job at the local ag co-op, I was arranging a display of new organic fertilizers when my boss, Tom, approached me. Abby, that proposal you submitted for the community garden project is brilliant. Have you thought about implementing some of these ideas on your family's farm? I laughed bitterly. Oh, I've thought about it plenty. Getting Dad on board is the real challenge. Tom frowned. That's a shame. With your knowledge, Hawkins Farm could be leading the charge in sustainable agriculture around here. His words stuck with me as I drove home that evening. The sun was setting over our fields, painting everything gold. This land was in my blood, and I was determined to see it thrive. I found Dad in the barn, tinkering with the old tractor. Dad, we need to talk about the farm's future. He sighed, putting down his wrench. Abby, not this again. Yes, this again, Dad. The world is changing, and if we don't change with it, we'll be left behind. He hesitated. Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. I'm thinking of retiring soon. My heart leaped. This was my chance. Really, Dad? That's great. I've got so many ideas for. He held up a hand, cutting me off. Now hold your horses. Retirement's a big step. We need to think carefully about who's going to take over. Something in his tone made me pause. What do you mean? I'm the one who's been working the land. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes. We'll discuss it more at the family dinner next week. Just keep an open mind, okay? As he walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Little did I know, my whole world was about to be turned upside down. The family dinner started like any other, with Mom's pot roast and Dad's bad jokes. But the tension in the air was thick as the gravy on our plates. So I've got an announcement to make, Dad said, clearing his throat. As you know, I'm planning to retire soon. I sat up straighter, heart pounding. This was it. I've been thinking long and hard about the future of this farm, he continued, and I've decided I'm handing it over to Brad. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? I gasped. Brad's face split into a smug grin. I'm honored, Frank. I'll do my best to live up to the Hawkins name. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad, this has to be a joke. I'm the one with a degree in agriculture. I'm the one who's been working this land. Dad shook his head. Abby, running a farm is more than book learning. It takes a firm hand. A man's touch. A man's touch. I repeated, my voice rising. Are you kidding me? This is the 21st century, Dad. Megan piped up. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Abby. It's not like you can't still help out. I rounded on her. Help out? This was supposed to be my future, Megan. Now, Abby, Dad started, his tone patronizing. Let's be realistic. You'll get married someday, have kids. You can't be expected to run a farm on top of that. I saw red. So that's it. My dreams don't matter because I'm a woman. Don't twist my words, Dad snapped. I'm doing what's best for this farm. Best for the farm? I laughed bitterly. Brad doesn't know the first thing about farming. Brad leaned back, smirking. I'm a quick learner. Besides, how hard can it be? I stood up so fast my chair toppled over. This is bull. And you know it, Dad, you're making a huge mistake. Dad's face hardened. My decision is final, Abigail. You can either accept it or what? I challenged. Or you can leave, he said quietly. The room fell silent. Mom looked like she wanted to say something but kept quiet. I looked around at their faces, Dad's stubbornness, Brad's smugness, Megan's indifference. In that moment, I knew I couldn't stay. Fine, I said, my voice shaking. I'm out of here. I stormed upstairs and started throwing clothes into a bag, tears blurring my vision. I refused to let the tears fall. As I was leaving, I overheard Dad and Brad talking in the study. Something about loans and missed payments. I paused, listening more closely. Don't worry about it, Dad was saying. We'll figure something out. Just don't mention this to the women, all right? I felt sick. Not only was Dad handing over my birthright to Brad, but he was hiding financial troubles too. I drove straight to Sarah's place, spilling the whole story between sobs. That sexist old goat, Sarah exclaimed. Abby, I'm so sorry. As my tears dried, a new determination set in. I'm not giving up, I said firmly. I'm going to prove to them that I can run a farm better than any man. Sarah grinned. Now that's the Abby I know. What's the plan? I took a deep breath. First, I need more experience. I'm going to apply for that job at AgriCorp. And then, I'm going to build something that'll make Dad eat his words. As I drove away from Sarah's, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. I'm sorry, honey. Your father means well. I turned off my phone without replying. Sorry wasn't good enough. Not anymore. The next morning, I walked into AgriCorp with my head held high. Hi, I'm Abigail Hawkins, and I'm here to apply for the junior exec position. This was just the beginning. They had no idea what was coming. 6 months into my job at AgriCorp, I was driving past the family farm when I noticed something off. The corn looked stunted, yellowish. I pulled over, frowning. What in the world? I muttered, examining a sickly-looking stalk. Just then, old Mr. Jenkins from the neighboring farm walked up. Abby, haven't seen you in a while. You here to help Brad? Lord knows he needs it. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Mr. Jenkins shook his head. That boy's running this place into the ground, using some newfangled pesticides that are killing everything but the weeds. My blood boiled. I thanked Mr. Jenkins and drove straight to Sarah's. We've got to do something, I said. Brad's destroying the farm. Sarah nodded. I've heard rumors. But Abby, what can we do? An idea struck me. We help everyone else, make Hawkins Farm the worst in the county by comparison. And that's exactly what we did. Every weekend, I'd visit neighboring farms, offering free consultations. Word spread fast. Did you hear? Abby Hawkins increased the Thompsons' yield by 40%. The Wilsons' organic transition, all thanks to Abby. Meanwhile, Brad was floundering. I kept tabs through the grapevine, each piece of news worse than the last. One day, I overheard 2 farmhands at the local diner. I'm telling you, it ain't right. Brad's spraying stuff that ain't even legal no more. And the migrant workers, he's paying them peanuts, threatening deportation if they complain. I clenched my fists. This was worse than I thought. I started gathering evidence, photos of illegal pesticides, testimonies from workers, soil samples showing contamination. It was damning stuff. Then came the call from Mom. "Abby, it's your father. He's had a heart attack." I rushed to the hospital, my stomach in knots. Dad looked small in the hospital bed, tubes everywhere. "The stress," Mom explained tearfully. "The farm's in trouble, and he won't let anyone help." I felt a pang of guilt. Had my actions contributed to this? As I left the hospital, lost in thought, I quite literally ran into someone. "Oh, I'm so sorry," the woman said, helping me pick up my dropped files. Her eyes widened as she saw the contents. "Wait a minute. Is this about Hawkins' farm?" I eyed her suspiciously. "Who's asking?" She stuck out her hand. "Alana Vasquez, investigative journalist. I've been looking into agricultural malpractices in the area, and it seems you've got quite the story." We talked for hours at a nearby cafe. Alana was sharp, passionate about exposing corruption in the industry. "This is bigger than just your family's farm, Abby," Alana said, her voice steady. "It's about workers' rights, environmental protection, and the future of farming in this region." I nodded slowly. "I know, but it's still my family. If this gets out, it could ruin them." Alina leaned forward, her eyes serious. "Sometimes doing the right thing means making tough choices. The question is, are you willing to make that choice?" I stared into my coffee, my mind racing. On one hand, this was my chance to prove myself, to show Dad he was wrong about me. On the other, it could destroy everything our family had built over generations. "I need some time to think," I said finally. Alina nodded. "Of course, but don't take too long. Stories like this have a way of coming out, with or without us." As I drove home that night, the weight of the decision pressed down on me. What was I willing to sacrifice for justice, for the truth? I pulled over at the edge of our property, looking out over the fields I'd grown up in. The farm was sick, dying under Brad's mismanagement, but it was still home. "What would you do, Mom?" I whispered, thinking of her quiet strength in the face of Dad's stubbornness. The answer came to me slowly, but with certainty. I knew what I had to do. I pulled out my phone and dialed Elena's number. "Hey, it's Abby. I'm in. Let's do this." Elena and I worked tirelessly on our expose. When it hit, it was like a bombshell. Unethical practices wrought local farm from the inside dominated the headlines. The story went viral, sparking outrage and investigations. I watched from afar as Brad was led away in handcuffs, charged with multiple violations. Dad stood in the driveway, looking shell-shocked. One day, as I helped the Wilsons replant, Dad's truck pulled up. "Abby, can we talk?" he asked, his voice weary. I straightened, wiping my hands on my jeans. "I'm busy, Dad." He nodded, eyes downcast. "I know. I messed up, Abby. I was wrong about everything. Can you forgive me?" For a moment, I wavered. Then I remembered the betrayal, the pain. "No, Dad, I can't. You didn't just hurt me, you hurt this whole community. Some things can't be undone." He flinched but nodded. "I understand. I'm proud of you, Abby, for what it's worth." As he drove away, I felt lighter. I was done seeking his approval. With community support and impressed investors, I started Hawkins' New Generation Farm, focused on sustainable, innovative practices. I had proven myself to the world. The Hawkins legacy lived on, not in Dad's old fields, but in the innovations I shared with the next generation. This was my victory, hard-won and sweet. And forgiveness. Some crops just aren't worth replanting. The story of Abby and her fight against injustice on the family farm has come to an end. Now, here's a question for you. Was Abby justified in exposing her family's unethical practices and refusing to forgive her father? Or should family loyalty come before personal ambition and moral principles? Is there a line where exposing a family's wrongdoing becomes the right thing to do, even if it destroys the family's legacy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective could help others wrestling with family conflicts and ethical dilemmas. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Hey everyone, I'm Sarah, a 25-year-old nurse living with my parents and my older brother, Mark, in our family home. I work hard at the local hospital, pulling long shifts and even helping out with the bills. I thought we were one big happy family. But wow, was I wrong. Sarah, honey, can you grab some groceries on your way home? Mom would always ask. And like the dutiful daughter, I'd reply, sure, no problem. Meanwhile, Mark would stroll in empty-handed. And they'd be all, oh, Mark, you must be so tired from your important job. My best friend, Lisa, kept trying to make me see the truth. Sarah, don't you see how they treat you differently? She'd say. But I'd brush it off. Come on, Lisa. They're my family. They love me. Then I met Alex, a super sweet teacher, and we hit it off right away. He started noticing things too. Sarah, I don't want to overstep, but doesn't it seem like your parents favor Mark? He asked one day. I laughed it off, but deep down, it hurt a little. Things got strange when Mark dropped some big news. Emma and I are having a baby, he announced at dinner. You'd think he cured cancer or something. The way Mom and Dad reacted. They went nuts, planning baby showers and talking about cribs. This calls for a celebration. Dad cheered, popping open the fancy champagne they never touched. I tried to be happy for him, but something felt off. Why weren't they this excited when I graduated from nursing school? One night, I overheard Mom and Dad talking in hushed tones. We can't keep this up, Mom whispered. The bills are piling up. I thought, hey, I can help more, so I approached them the next day. Hey, I couldn't help overhearing. I can pitch in more if you need, I offered. Dad waved me off. No, sweetie, everything's fine. Don't worry your pretty little head. But their smiles didn't reach their eyes. I knew something was up. Little did I know, they were planning something that would turn my world upside down. If I'd known then what I know now, I would have packed my bags that very night. So there I was, dragging myself home after a grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital. My feet were aching, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed. But when I got to the front door, my key wouldn't work. I thought I was losing my mind. What the heck? I muttered, jiggling the handle. No luck. I called Mom and Dad, but it went straight to voicemail. Weird, right? They always pick up. I started to freak out a little, so I called Alex. Hey, something's wrong. Can you come over? Alex showed up in record time, and we sat on the porch for hours, waiting for someone to show up. I was getting more anxious by the minute. Maybe they're just out and forgot to tell you they changed the locks, Alex suggested, trying to calm me down. Finally, Mark rolled up in his fancy car, looking smug. Well, if it isn't little sis, he smirked. Mark, what's going on? Why are the locks changed? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He leaned against his car, all smug. Oh, didn't Mom and Dad tell you? They decided to turn your room into a nursery for my baby. Surprise. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. What? No way. Where's all my stuff? Storage unit across town. Don't worry, it's all boxed up nice and neat, he said, like he was doing me a favor. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This has to be a joke, right, Mark? Come on. Just then, Mom and Dad pulled up. I ran to them, hoping for some sanity. Mom, Dad, please tell me this isn't true. Dad looked uncomfortable, but Mom just sighed. Sarah, honey, we thought it was time for you to spread your wings. You're an adult now. Spread my wings. You're kicking me out. Now, Dad chimed in. It's for the greater good of the family. Mark's baby needs a proper nursery. I was stunned. And what about me? Where am I supposed to go? Mom patted my arm. You're a smart girl. You'll figure it out. I looked at Alex, tears streaming down my face. He stepped forward. She can stay with me for now. As we packed up my car with a few things I had on me, I couldn't stop shaking. My own family had just tossed me out like yesterday's trash. I can't believe this is happening, I whispered to Alex as we drove away. He squeezed my hand. We'll figure this out, Sarah. I promise. But as we headed to his place, all I could think was, how could they do this to me, my own family? The people I trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the worst way possible. But let me tell you, this was just the beginning of the storm that was about to hit them. After crashing at Alex's place for a few days, I decided it was time to stop moping and start fighting back. I mean, what they did couldn't be legal, right? I dove into researching tenant rights, hitting the internet hard, and turns out I was onto something. I called up Lisa. Lisa, you won't believe this. What they did is totally illegal. I told you they were shady. What are you going to do? I'm going to need your help. We're going detective mode. Lisa and I started digging deep into my family's finances, and what we found made my blood boil. Holy cow, Sarah, look at this. Lisa gasped, pointing at her laptop screen. They've been using your name to open credit cards. I felt sick. Are you kidding me? How long has this been going on? We traced it back years. They'd been playing me for a fool all this time. I immediately called the lawyer, Mr. Johnson. He didn't sugarcoat it. Miss Sarah, what they've done is highly illegal. You've got a strong case for both illegal eviction and identity theft. I nodded, determined. What do I need to do? Gather every piece of evidence you can, bank statements, credit reports, anything that shows their misuse of your identity. I was on it like white on rice. I collected everything, even recorded some conversations with my so-called family where they basically admitted what they'd done. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to know what they were saying behind my back, so I got creative. Alex, I need your help with something crazy, I said one night. What's the plan? He asked, not even hesitating. We snuck into my old house when everyone was out and set up hidden cameras in my old room. Now the precious nursery. The things I heard, man, it was like a knife to the heart. Good riddance to Sarah, I heard Mark say. Now we can really cash in on those credit cards. Mom laughed. She was always so gullible, never questioned a thing. I was seeing red, but I kept my cool. This was gold for my case. I decided to reach out to my extended family. Aunt Carol was the first call. Aunt Carol, you're not going to believe what's been happening. I spilled everything. She was horrified. Sarah, honey, that's awful. What can we do to help? One by one, I called my relatives. They were all shocked, all supportive. It felt good to know not everyone in my family was rotten to the core. As I gathered more evidence, recorded more conversations, and built my case, I felt stronger every day. They thought they could walk all over me, but they had no idea what was coming. Alex, I said one night, looking at the mountain of evidence we'd collected, I think it's time to drop the hammer. He smiled, squeezing my hand. I'm with you all the way, Sarah. Let's show them what happens when they mess with the wrong nurse. I nodded, a fire burning in my eyes. Revenge was coming, and it was going to be sweet. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was about to go down. The police station loomed before me, a concrete fortress of justice. With my stack of evidence tucked under my arm, I pushed through the doors. I'd like to file a report for identity theft and illegal eviction. I told the officer at the desk, my voice steady despite the nerves churning in my stomach. The cop raised an eyebrow. That's some heavy stuff. You got proof? I nodded, dropping the pile of documents on his desk. Oh, I've got proof, all right. Bank statements, recorded conversations, the whole 9 yards. As the officer flipped through the pages, his eyes widened. Holy, he muttered under his breath. This is your family. Unfortunately, I replied, a bitter taste in my mouth. The next few hours were a blur of questions, statements, and more paperwork than I'd ever seen in my life. But when I walked out of that station, a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The wheels of justice were finally turning. Days passed in a haze of anticipation, and then, out of the blue, my phone blew up with notifications. It seems the cops had made their move, freezing my parents' and Mark's assets faster than you could say, karma's But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I sent out invites for a family gathering, making it sound all warm and fuzzy. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole damn clan was going to be there. And boy, were they in for a surprise. The day arrived, and I watched as they all filtered into the house. Clueless smiles plastered on their faces. My parents and Mark looked particularly smug, probably thinking they'd gotten away with everything. I waited until everyone had settled in before dropping the bomb. So I bet you're all wondering why I called this little shindig. I began, my voice ringing out across the suddenly quiet room. Well, buckle up, because it's story time. I hit play on the recorder, and the room filled with the sound of my family's greed and betrayal. Gasps echoed around me as I laid up document after document, exposing every dirty detail of their scheme. You see, I continued, my eyes locked on my parents and Mark. These fine folks decided to steal my identity, rack up a mountain of debt in my name, and then kick me out of my own house. Cool, right? The silence was deafening, and then all hell broke loose. How could you? My aunt shrieked at my mom. I can't believe this, my cousin muttered, shaking his head in disgust. But the best reaction came from Emma, Mark's wife. She stood up, her face a mask of fury and betrayal. You son of a, she spat at Mark. I want a divorce. As Emma stormed out, slamming the door behind her, I couldn't help but smile. But I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. The house of cards was finally tumbling down. When the day of reckoning arrived, the courtroom was packed. I sat in the front row, watching as my parents and Mark were led in, looking small and pathetic in their orange jumpsuits. The judge, a stern-faced woman with piercing eyes, glared down at them from her bench. How do you plead? She asked. They mumbled their guilty pleas, unable to meet anyone's gaze. I've seen a lot of despicable things in my time, the judge began, her voice dripping with contempt. But this takes the cake. To betray your own flesh and blood for personal gain, it's beyond comprehension. She sentenced them to jail time, not as much as I'd hoped, but enough to make them sweat. Plus, they were ordered to pay back every cent they'd stolen from me. As they were led away, Mark caught my eye. For a second, I thought I saw a flicker of remorse. But then it was gone, replaced by the same old arrogance. Some people never change. With the trial over, I finally had a chance to breathe. The house, which had been a source of so much pain, was now mine. Turns out all those years of rent I'd been paying amounted to a pretty significant stake in the property. But I couldn't stay there, too many bad memories. So I decided to sell it and use the money to start fresh. A few weeks later, I was unpacking boxes in my new apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No strings attached, no manipulative family members lurking around every corner. To new beginnings, Alex said, raising a beer bottle. And to karma, Lisa added with a grin. I clinked my bottle against theirs, a smile spreading across my face. To freedom. As we laughed and joked, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, unadulterated happiness. Sure, my family was behind bars, and I had to rebuild my life from scratch. But standing there, surrounded by true friends and free from the weight of lies and manipulation, I knew I'd made the right choice. Life's funny like that. Sometimes you've got to lose everything to gain something even better. And me? I gained myself back, and that's worth more than any house or family fortune. And that's where Sarah's story ends, folks. Now, I've got a question for you that might spark some debate. Do you think Sarah was justified in exposing her family's actions publicly, or should she have handled it more privately? What would you have done in her shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear your take on this. If you enjoyed this wild ride, why not hit that like button? And hey, if you want more stories like this, consider subscribing to the channel. Hi, I'm Hannah, a 34-year-old graphic designer. My sister Elena, who's 38, and I have always been very close. She's married to Mark, a real estate agent, and they have 2 kids, Lily, who's 8, and Owen, who's 5. From the outside, Elena's life looks perfect, but I've always sensed something off about Mark. He's charming at first glance, but there's a coldness beneath the surface, especially when it comes to supporting Elena emotionally. Mark is obsessed with appearances and money, often focusing on his career while neglecting his family. He's always on his phone or out networking. I spend a lot of time at their house, helping Elena with the kids, and I've noticed how distant Mark is. When he interacts with them, it seems more out of obligation than genuine interest. One day, Mark suddenly brought up refinancing a mortgage. Elena, already stressed from work, brushed it off, but Mark was insistent, as if their finances were the only thing that mattered. It struck me as odd, especially with everything else Elena was juggling. Later, at the park with the kids, I asked Elena if Mark's behavior bothered her. She shrugged it off, saying he was just stressed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The way Mark prioritized money and status over his family left a bad taste in my mouth. I knew this calm couldn't last forever. Then came the call, early in the morning, the kind you never want to receive. Elena's voice was trembling, filled with fear. I went to the doctor yesterday. It's cancer, Hannah. Stage 3 breast cancer. My heart sank. It felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. What did they say? What's the next step? I asked, trying to steady myself. They want to start treatment immediately. Chemo, surgery, everything. They're hopeful, but it's bad, Hannah. It's really bad. Elena's diagnosis hit us like a ton of bricks. I rushed to her house where she sat at the kitchen table, pale and frightened. We're going to fight this, I told her, trying to be strong, but something was off. Mark was acting colder than usual. Instead of comforting Elena, Mark started talking about selling their house. We need to downsize and prepare for the worst, he said bluntly, as if it were just another business deal. Elena was stunned. Mark, this is our home. We can't just sell it. The kids need stability right now. But Mark was adamant, having already spoken to a realtor and pushing hard to move forward with the sale. As days passed, Mark's behavior grew more suspicious. He was constantly on his phone, making secretive calls, and leaving the house without explanation. My unease turned to alarm when I overheard him discussing liquidating assets. I knew I had to investigate further. I soon uncovered the truth. Mark had listed their house for sale without telling Elena and was transferring money into a separate account, planning to leave her and the kids once the house sold. I couldn't let him get away with this. The more I thought about what he was doing, the angrier I got. I knew I had to act quickly before he finalized his plans, but I couldn't do it alone. Elena needed to see the truth, even though it would break her heart. Elena, we need to talk, I said, sitting her down at the kitchen table, my hands shaking from what I had uncovered. What is it, Hannah? You look like you've seen a ghost. I took a deep breath. It's about Mark. I think he's planning to leave you and the kids. Her eyes widened in shock. No, he wouldn't. I mean, he's been distant, but we're just going through a rough patch. He wouldn't do that. I wish that were true, Elena, I said. But I found proof. He's already listed the house for sale and is moving money into a separate account. He's been planning this for a while. Tears welled up in her eyes. No, it can't be. Why would he do that? How could he? We've been together for so long. I know it's hard to believe, but I have all the evidence. I'm sorry, Elena, but you need to see this for what it is. He's not the man you thought he was. I don't understand why now, why when I'm going through this. How could he be so heartless? Because he's a coward, Elena. He's running away from his responsibilities, from you and the kids, but we're not going to let him get away with it. She wiped her eyes, trying to regain her composure. What do we do now? I can't just sit here and let him destroy everything we've built. We're going to fight back, I said firmly. But we need to be smart about it, I said firmly. I've already contacted a lawyer and a financial advisor. They're going to help us protect your assets and gather all the evidence we need to confront him. We'll make sure he doesn't get a dime of what's yours. Elena nodded, a new determination lighting up her eyes. I can't believe I ever trusted him, but I'm not going to let him ruin my life, not after everything I've been through. Good, I replied. But we need to be careful. We can't let him know we're onto him. We'll let him think his plan is working while we gather everything we need to take him down. It didn't take long to uncover the full extent of his betrayal. Mark had been seeing another woman for months, someone he'd met through his real estate work. He was planning to sell the house, take the money, and start a new life with her, leaving Elena and the kids with nothing. The more we dug, the more disgusted I became. One evening, after Mark had left for one of his secret meetings, Elena and I sat down to finalize our plan. We're going to confront him, I said. But we need to do it in a way that he can't talk his way out of. Elena looked at me with steely resolve. How? At the next family gathering, I said, in front of everyone. He won't be able to lie or manipulate his way out of it if there are witnesses. A grim smile spread across Elena's face. Good. I want everyone to see him for what he really is. The plan was set. We would wait for the perfect moment when Mark was least expecting it and expose him in front of everyone. There would be no escape for him, no way to hide his betrayal. The day of the family gathering arrived, and the tension was palpable. Everyone had gathered at our parents' house, a place that had always been filled with warmth and love. Today, however, there was an undercurrent of anticipation and perhaps even fear. Mark, as usual, was smug and completely unaware of the storm about to hit him. Elena and I had rehearsed this moment countless times, but now that it was here, I could see the anxiety creeping into her eyes. Mark stood up to make some meaningless small talk, holding a glass of wine and flashing that fake smile of his. I could feel my anger boiling inside me, but I kept my composure. We had to do this right. Mark, we need to talk, Elena said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. He looked at her, a slight frown forming on his face. Can it wait? I was just about to. No, Elena cut him off, standing up slowly. It can't wait. It's about the house. About everything. Mark's face went pale. What are you talking about? I stood up beside Elena, pulling out the stack of documents we had prepared. We know what you've been doing, Mark. The secret accounts, the plans to sell the house, the other woman. It's all right here. The room fell silent. Everyone was staring at us, confused and shocked. Mark's eyes darted around, searching for a way out, but there wasn't one. You've been planning to leave us, Elena continued, her voice trembling with anger. You were going to sell the house, take the money, and leave me and the kids with nothing. And you were going to do it while I'm fighting for my life. Mark tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He glanced at his parents, then at mine, desperately seeking support, but all he received were cold, accusing stares. It's not what you think, he finally stammered. I was just trying to. To what? I snapped. Abandon your wife and children, steal everything they have, and run off with your mistress. Don't even try to lie your way out of this, Mark. We have all the proof we need. Elena handed him the papers. As he flipped through them, I could see the panic setting in. He knew he was finished. You've made your choices, Mark, Elena said, her voice steady now. And now you're going to face the consequences. Before he could respond, our lawyer walked into the room, a stern look on his face. Mark, these papers are for you. You've been served. Elena is filing for divorce, and all your assets are frozen. You won't be able to touch a single cent. Mark's face turned ashen, his confidence evaporating as he looked like he was about to collapse. You can't do this. This isn't fair, he stammered. Fair? Elena shot back, her eyes blazing. You want to talk about fair after everything you've done? No, Mark, this is justice. This is what happens when you betray your family. Mark's parents tried to intervene, but our lawyer quickly shut them down. I'd advise you to stay out of this, Mr. and Mrs. Richards. Your son's actions have consequences, and he's going to have to deal with them. The room fell into a deathly silence as Mark realized there was no escape. His life was crumbling around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Defeated, he slumped into a chair, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. I'm sorry, he mumbled, his voice barely audible. But Elena wasn't having it. Sorry doesn't change what you did. Sorry doesn't make up for the pain you've caused. You're going to pay for this, Mark, and no apology will fix it. As the reality of his situation hit him, Mark's entire demeanor changed. The confidence and arrogance were gone, leaving a broken man. Everyone in the room could see it. In the days that followed, Mark's life unraveled completely. His reputation in the real estate world was ruined as news of his betrayal spread. His mistress, who had only been interested in his money, left him the moment she realized he had nothing left. Mark lost his job, his friends, everything. Meanwhile, Elena began the slow process of healing. She focused on her treatments, determined to beat the cancer that had threatened to take everything from her. With the divorce proceedings underway, she gained full custody of the kids, and Mark was legally barred from accessing any of the family's finances. I stood by her side through it all, helping her rebuild her life piece by piece. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. But Elena was strong, stronger than she ever knew. One evening, after another long day of treatments and legal battles, we stood together in her backyard, watching Lily and Ellen play. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw Elena smile. A real, genuine smile. We made it, she said quietly, squeezing my hand. We survived. I nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. Yeah, we did. The story has ended, but here's a question for you all. If you discovered that someone close to you was planning to betray you at your most vulnerable moment, would you confront them publicly like Elena did, or would you handle it privately? What would you do differently in her situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.